Before we get to the race itself, I feel it's pertinent to give a backstory behind this. Obviously, it perhaps goes without saying that Nascar is a form of racing that originated in America. Sure, in recent years we've had the European-based series, which is an entertaining watch. However, during NASCAR's boom period of the late 90s, early noughties, the sport in the UK was not massively well known or accessible for someone like myself. I'd seen clips on YouTube about NASCAR in and around 2009/10. However, for me to watch the series live in the UK with the full races, it just wasn't possible. Hence why, around this point, I really didn't know much about it. I'd remembered some of the drivers and knew of the Daytona 500 and the other superspeedway races, but that was about it. Now, let's jump back in time to around 2006. For me, I was fascinated for some strange reason about Sky Television. I was always intrigued by how many channels there were. Don't ask why, it was just my inexperienced brain being a bit bemusing. One day, I for some reason thought it was a good idea to press 3 random numbers to see what TV channel would pop up. In hindsight, that idea had its risks, but luckily it paid off. I put in the number 413. That number put me through to Motors TV. From the moment I first laid my eyes on this channel, I was grabbed by the racing bug. Motors TV was an incredible place to find all kinds of racing series, from smaller UK-based series such as Ford Fiestas and Caterhams, to bigger international series such as Live Le Mans and American Le Mans racing. It was Motorsport Nirvana, a channel dedicated to the UK and, as I later discovered, the European racing fan. It was, in essence, Europe's speed channel. All of this, though, was at my grandparents' house, so usually every weekend I'd scroll 1 week ahead to see what was coming up on Motors TV so I could see what was on. In February of 2012, I saw a slot in the schedule that included live coverage of the NASCAR Nationwide Series at Daytona. Let's just put it this way, I was very interested to see what it was like to watch a live NASCAR race. In my complete lack of knowledge on the sport, I for some reason thought I was going to be watching the Cup Series race, which would have meant it was the Daytona 500. It took me the day after I watched the race to realise it was the Development Series. Either way, let's go over it. Although before we begin, I will say that it's really cool that there is a broadcast of this race via the Motors TV perspective online. It just massively adds to the nostalgia for me, which gives me the terrifying thought that despite the fact I remember this race like it was yesterday, it occurred 11 years ago. Humbling thought that. This was the 2012 Drive for Cop D300, the start of the NASCAR Nationwide Series, full of young stars wanting to prove themselves, along with drivers just wanting to get some experience for the following Daytona 500. Coming into the race, I had no idea what to expect during it. I'd seen that big crashes occurred, but didn't know if that was what I should have anticipated come race day. The answer became ever clearer over the course of the next 2 hours 18 minutes and 51 seconds. The race started with Danica Patrick on pole position in the Junior Motorsports Chevrolet, back in the day when the Impala was the main body style for Chevy-powered cars. Again, that makes how old this race is even more terrifying. I would go over the rest of the grid, however I feel it's completely and utterly pointless considering the sort of racing it is, and qualifying matters very little. So away they went. Well, they did. For international viewers, you may have had a picture breakup, but luckily this didn't occur very often. Danica was given a big old push from her team owner, Dale Earnhardt Jr. This was back in the day you could do tandem drafting without getting any repercussions from it, unless you stayed bumper to bumper for so long that you overheated the engine. This pattern continued for a while, albeit with Patrick hitting the wall as that was happening. By around lap 30, the field was fairly spread out in several pairs. However, the leader would be Dale Earnhardt Jr. when the first caution flew for Jason Bowles' car, smoking coming out of turn 4. The race would get going again, and on the most part the pack would stay bunched together. until JJ Yaley started smoking also, and pulled off the track, causing the pack to separate. However, the caution wouldn't come out. It would later though. Not for this close call, but for Danica impacting the turn 3 wall after getting unsettled by a bump from the 88 of Cole Witt. One of her teammates, ironically enough. Danica would get going again, but wouldn't be a factor in the rest of the race. After Cole Witt got spun in the pit lane, the next restart followed, only for the third caution to fly on lap 60. This time for Mike Bliss, who had been in the lead for a portion of this race in a team that usually doesn't factor towards the front. However, he would get into the outside wall just before turn 3, to which he would sadly retire from the race. The race restarted with the pack close together again, until another caution flew 10 laps later. It was a fairly tame accident by Daytona standards, but the 11 of Brian Scott went into the side of the 30 of James Busher. Scott kept going, finishing 24 laps down. The race would get going and settle down with the field pretty spread out once again, with the usual suspects in the Cup Series regulars towards the front, in their relatively organised pairs. Until Joey Gase started smoking, bringing out the caution. From that point on, things went a bit bonkers. Timmy Hill would lead the restart, where the moves were bolder and harder, less patient than they had been at the start of the event. With under 20 laps to go, the race achieved a record number of lead changes in a nationwide race at Daytona. As the US audience went to an ad break, it gives me a chance to show what viewers on Motors TV saw. For us, there weren't any adverts, so we could see the race continue. We went on board with Kurt Busch, who was getting a bump draft from his brother Kyle. The phrase "back out of it" was what was running through my mind as Kurt continued to travel through too smaller a gap, but somehow they made it through. Not behind them though, I'd seen my first ever big one in live form. Cars were going everywhere, spinning, crashing, on-firing, and going underneath another car. A ring. 14 cars were collected in this crash, putting all of them either out of winning contention or out of the race entirely. The race was red flagged as the safety barrier was being repaired, but it would be restarted with 8 laps to go. I'd seen a big one, yet I was on the edge of my seat seeing how intense the racing was. Until David Reagan got into the rear quarter panel of Sam Hornish Jr., spinning him out in the middle of the pack. Somehow this incident wasn't bigger than what you see here, with a number of drivers continuing with just small repairs required. David Reagan and Michael Annett weren't so fortunate. Although I don't know how Scott's speed was involved in this crash because according to Wikipedia and Racing Reference, it says he failed to qualify. Anyway, potential inaccuracies aside, it was time for the run to the finish. Well, assuming there'd be no green-white checkered finish. As the speed built up and the white flag was waved, the usual suspects were at the front, in Logano, the Busch brothers, Tony Stewart and Trevor Bayne, who had recovered from being 2 laps down. Stewart had an enormous push from Elliott Sadler, and Kurt Busch, trying to defend the impossible, squeezed Logano, Bayne, Stewart and Sadler into the wall, whilst Kyle Busch and several other contenders collided, trying to avoid, with massive impacts for some of them. It was complete and utter bedlam. One person, though, came out on top in all of this mess. That person was James Busher. He stayed out of trouble the whole race, mostly, and was in the right place at the right time to capitalise on the carnage. I had no idea that this was a shock win either at the time. I was just in awe at what I had just seen. To the regular NASCAR fan, this would have been a fairly typical super speedway race, with a shock winner, mind. For me though, what I had just seen had got me hooked, and I wanted to see more of NASCAR. But it was more than just the racing. I feel I have to give a mention to the 3 commentators for that race, Andy Petrie, Dale Jarrett, and particularly Alan Bestwick. The 3 I felt worked really well together. However, Alan to me was a great broadcaster for someone watching their first live NASCAR race, flag to flag. He was unmistakably American with how he was describing the exciting moments of the race, but he had a level of calmness and I'd almost go as far as saying serenity when it came to describing the race as it was happening. And it made the process of me learning about NASCAR much more straightforward, and made me grasp it quicker as well. In fact, that's why personally I've always wanted Alan to get back into the commentary booth for top level motorsport. and I'm glad that I don't seem to be the only one who wants to see that. For me though, this race was what got me into enjoying NASCAR now. Currently, NASCAR is not perfect in my view, but the fact that I became a fan in the first place was because of this race. However, I want to shine a small spotlight on Motors TV, because without this channel broadcasting the NASCAR races along with several other international and national races alongside of that, I would not be anywhere near as passionate about motorsport as I am now. It made me catch the racing bug, and I was devastated to see that after a name change, the channel would no longer exist in TV form in 2018. A TV-based, 24/7 dedicated motorsport channel can work. Motors TV wasn't just enormously beneficial for me, but countless other people who gained the racing bug from this channel, who have gone on to become lifelong motorsport fans ever since. That though is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. What race got you hooked to NASCAR, or even motorsport in general? Say in the comment section. However, until the next video, enjoy the rest of your day.